The gavel stopped an inch above the wood, and for 3 full seconds, Judge Elias Whitlock could not make his hand finish the motion, because the woman standing before his bench, hands folded, chin lifted, waiting for the word that would end her life as she knew it, was his daughter. The courtroom held its breath. Somewhere in the gallery a chair creaked. Nobody dared cough. 24 years old, and Naomi Whitlock stood in the exact spot where he had sentenced horse thieves, con men, and one time, a man who murdered his own brother over a card game. She stood there now, wearing the blue dress her mother had sewn her before the fever took her, and she looked at her father like she was waiting for him to be brave enough to be a judge before he was a father. "Elias," she whispered. "Not your honor. Not in that courtroom, in front of God and Hollow Ridge and Prosecutor Mercer Cole's hungry little smile. Elias, do what's right." He did not know, in that moment, whether she meant "let me go," or say the words. 3 weeks earlier, none of this existed. 3 weeks earlier, Colonel Augustus Reyes owned half the grazing land east of the river, most of the bank's paper, and, as it turned out, a secret that could burn Hollow Ridge to the ground. He was found in his study on a Tuesday morning, slumped over his ledgers, a bullet through his chest. His gold pocket watch stopped at 11:41. His housekeeper found him. She also found, on the floor by his boot, a woman's hairpin. Plain silver, nothing special, except that half the town recognized it, because half the town had seen Naomi Whitlock wear it to church every Sunday of her life. By sundown, Deputy Thomas Hale had no choice. He rode out to the Whitlock homestead with his badge catching the last orange light, and he arrested the judge's daughter, with his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped the cuffs. "Naomi," he said, and his voice broke on her name. "I have to." "I know," she said, and then quieter. "Thomas, don't look at me like that. It'll only make this harder." He looked at her like that anyway. Here is what Elias Whitlock knew about his daughter that the town did not. He knew she had gone to see Reyes 3 times in the 2 weeks before he died. He knew because he'd followed her the last time, hanging back on the ridge road with his hat pulled low like a man half his age playing at spying, ashamed of himself and unable to stop. He knew Reyes had smiled at her on his porch like a man who held something over her head. He knew his daughter had come home that night and locked herself in her room and not eaten supper, and he knew, this was the part he told no one, not even Thomas, not even the sheriff, that 20 years ago, when Elias Whitlock was a younger judge trying to make a name for himself in a lawless county, he had done something he had never forgiven himself for. He had sent an innocent man to the gallows. The man's name was Caleb Doss, a drifter, accused of robbing the county payroll wagon. Whitlock had presided. The evidence had been thin, a coat that might have matched, a witness who'd since recanted twice. But the town wanted blood, and a young judge wanting re-election had given it to them. Doss had hanged on a cold February morning, protesting his innocence until the rope caught his voice. 6 years later, the real thief confessed on his deathbed. Elias Whitlock had buried that confession in a drawer in his study and told no living soul, because to reveal it would end his career, disgrace his name, and, worse, so much worse, it would mean admitting to his own daughter, who worshipped the ground he walked on, that her father had killed an innocent man with nothing but a signature. Augustus Reyes had found the confession letter 11 days before he died. He wanted money, Naomi told her father, in the small gray room behind the courthouse, where prisoners waited before trial, her wrists still marked from the rope Thomas had used, because Hollow Ridge didn't own proper cuffs for a lady. He said if I didn't pay him, he'd bring the letter to the county paper, he said. She stopped, looked at her hands. He said it would be a fine thing, watching the Honorable Judge Whitlock hang from the same gallows he built his career standing beside. Elias felt something in his chest crack clean in half. "You should have told me," he said. "And what would you have done?" Her eyes came up, and there was nothing soft in them now, nothing of the girl who used to fall asleep against his shoulder during Sunday sermons. "Confessed? Let them take everything. Your name, your bench." Caleb Doss's grave dug up and paraded through every newspaper from here to Denver. "I couldn't watch that happen to you. I couldn't." So instead, you let them think you killed a man." "I didn't let them think anything," she said. "I went to get the letter back. That's all. I went to that house to steal a piece of paper. Papa, not to kill anyone." It was the first time in 15 years she'd called him Papa instead of Elias. He believed her. God help him, he believed every word, and it changed nothing, because belief was not evidence. And evidence was the only currency that mattered in the room, where he was about to sit in judgment of her. The trial opened on a Thursday, and Hollow Ridge had never seen anything like it. Prosecutor Mercer Cole built his case like a man laying bricks for his own throne. The hairpin. A neighbor who'd seen Naomi's horse tied outside the Reyes ranch that night. A motive. Once Cole's men started digging, because word travels, even secrets that were supposed to stay buried, that the judge's family had reason to want Augustus Reyes silenced. Cole did not yet have the letter. He did not yet know what it said. But he smelled blood on the water, and he smiled at Elias from across the courtroom, like a wolf smiling at a wounded deer he intended to run for sport before he killed it. "Your Honor," Cole said, on the second day, given the unusual circumstances, perhaps the court would consider recusing itself. Elias's hand tightened on his gavel. "Denied," he said, and his voice did not shake, though everything else in him did. "There is no other judge within 80 miles, Mr. Cole, and you know it. This court will proceed." He told himself it was the only choice. He told himself, lying awake at 3 in the morning in the empty house that had once held his wife's laughter and his daughter's childhood, that a man who ran from hard things was no judge at all. He did not tell himself the truth. That some small, terrified part of him needed to sit on that bench and hear every piece of evidence himself. Because if anyone else controlled the outcome, he could not protect her. The twist came on the 4th day, and it came from Thomas Hale. Thomas had not slept in 3 days. He had spent every waking hour retracing Naomi's path that night, refusing to believe what the town had already decided. And on the morning of the 4th day, he walked into the courthouse holding a burlap sack, and inside it was Augustus Reyes's missing revolver, found, not at the Whitlock homestead, not anywhere near Naomi, but wedged behind a loose floorboard in the ranch's stable, wiped clean of prints except for one smudged partial that belonged to Reyes's own foreman, a quiet man named Silas Burke, who had worked the ranch for 9 years and stood to inherit nothing when his employer died, except a debt of $800 that Reyes had been threatening to call due that very week, with the threat of debtor's prison hanging over Burke's wife and 3 children. The courtroom erupted. Cole objected. Elias banged the gavel until his palm ached, and in the chaos, he caught his daughter's eye across the room, and for the first time in 3 weeks she smiled at him. Small, exhausted, real. But it was not that simple. It was never going to be that simple, because Silas Burke had an alibi. 3 witnesses who placed him 12 miles away that night, at his sister's farm, mending a wagon wheel until well past midnight. The revolver, damning as it looked, proved only that someone had hidden it in the stable at some point. It did not prove Silas Burke pulled the trigger. It did not clear Naomi. It only muddied water that had already been thick with mud. And worse, far worse, Prosecutor Cole, digging through Reyes's private papers to build his case, found the letter, Caleb Doss's deathbed confession, and beneath it, in his own hand, Judge Elias Whitlock's signature on the drawer where he'd hidden it for 14 years. Cole brought it to the courthouse on the 5th morning and set it on the bench, in front of Elias, without a word, letting the silence do the talking. "I could ruin you with this," Cole said quietly, so only Elias could hear. "Right now, today. I could stand up in that courtroom and read it to every soul in Hollow Ridge, and your daughter's trial would be the least of your troubles." Elias looked at the letter, at Caleb Doss's shaking, dying handwriting, at his own signature beneath it, evidence of 20 years of cowardice folded into a single yellowed page. "Why haven't you?" he asked. Cole's smile faded, just slightly. "Because I'm not the man Reyes was. I want your bench, Whitlock, not your ruin. But I want it clean." He tapped the letter. "You have until the verdict. After that, this goes to the county paper whether your daughter hangs or walks free." Justice for Doss is 20 years overdue. It doesn't wait on your family's convenience any longer. For the first time since his wife died, Elias Whitlock felt the full weight of every choice he had ever made settle onto his chest at once, and he did not know how he was still breathing under it. That night, he went to Naomi's cell alone, past the sleeping deputy at the desk, and he told her everything. Caleb Doss, the confession, the signature. 20 years of silence he'd worn like a second skin, so long he'd almost forgotten it wasn't just part of him. She listened without interrupting, sitting on the edge of the cot with her hands in her lap, and when he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "I always knew there was something," she said finally. "Some sadness in you that never had a name. I used to think it was Mama." "It was both," he admitted. "Rise didn't just want money," she said slowly, understanding arriving in her eyes like dawn breaking over a field. "He wanted to watch you choose between me and your name. That's why he told me and not you directly. He wanted to be the man who broke Judge Whitlock, not by killing you, but by making you kill yourself, one impossible choice at a time." Elias closed his eyes. "And I let him win anyway, sitting on that bench every day, pretending I could be fair." Naomi reached through the bars and took her father's hand, the first time she had touched him since the arrest, and said the words that would carry him through the final day. "Then stop pretending. Be a father who happens to wear a robe, not a robe that happens to have a father in it." The verdict came on the 6th day, and Hollow Ridge packed itself into that courthouse, until men stood 3 deep along the back wall. Elias Whitlock did not deliver a verdict of guilty or innocent, because the law, in its narrow wisdom, required more than a father's certainty. Instead, he did something no one in that courtroom, not Cole, not the jury, not even Naomi, expected. He stepped down from the bench. "I cannot sit in judgment of my own daughter," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, steady now, stripped of 20 years of fear. "Not because the law forbids it, because I forbid it at last of myself. This court has sentenced an innocent man once before, on evidence no stronger than what stands against my daughter today. I signed that death warrant. I have carried it in silence for 14 years, and I will carry the silence no longer." He laid Caleb Doss's confession on the bench for the entire room to see. "I ask that Judge Harmon be sent for from the county seat to hear the remainder of this trial, fairly, by a man with nothing to lose or protect. And I ask that this court, in the meantime, hear one more piece of testimony from Silas Burke's wife, who came to me last night, after her husband could no longer bear watching an innocent woman stand trial for what he did in a moment of desperation he has regretted every hour since." The room came apart into noise. Silas Burke confessed within the hour, weeping, his wife's hand gripping his on the courthouse steps as the deputy led him away. Not out of cruelty, but relief, the particular relief of a guilty man finally allowed to stop running. Naomi Whitlock walked out of that courthouse a free woman as the sun dropped gold and heavy over Hollow Ridge. And the first person to reach her was not Thomas Hale, though he stood close behind, hat in his hands, waiting his turn with the patient ache of a man who had loved her quietly for years and would go on loving her quietly for as many more as it took. The first person to reach her was her father. He did not say he was sorry, though he was. He did not say he had been afraid, though he had been, more afraid than he had ever been of anything in his 60 years. He simply opened his arms, and his daughter walked into them the way she had when she was small enough to fit against his chest. And the whole town of Hollow Ridge watched Judge Elias Whitlock hold his daughter and weep without shame in the street. Elias Whitlock resigned from the bench 3 days later. He asked that Caleb Doss's name be cleared in the county record, that whatever remained of Doss's family, a sister, it turned out, still living 2 counties over, be told the truth and given what compensation the county could offer, though no amount of money buys back a hanged man's life. He spent his last years running a small law office out of the front room of the Whitlock homestead, taking cases for farmers and widows who could not otherwise afford justice, as if trying, one small kindness at a time, to pay back a debt that could never fully be settled. Naomi married Thomas Hale the following spring. In a ceremony held in the garden her mother had once tended, and her father walked her down the aisle wearing, for the first time in 20 years, no robe at all, only a plain gray coat, and a face finally at peace. The law tells us what is lawful. Elias liked to say in his later years to the young men who came asking him for legal advice, "It rarely tells us what is right. A man is lucky if he lives long enough to learn the difference before it costs him everything he loves." Hollow Ridge remembers the trial still, the way small towns remember the days their whole world seemed to hold its breath. They remember the gavel that never fell. They remember a judge who broke the law to keep his soul, and a daughter who forgave him for every year he hadn't been brave enough to. And they remember, most of all, the silence. The particular, aching silence of an entire courtroom, watching a father choose, at last, to be human before he was anything else.